Cool. I watched the movie this morning. I thought it was fantastic.
Oh,
Really
thank
good. Yeah, I'm
thank you.
just sad not to be there in Toronto this year in person. So, but no, still, it was great. But I'm gonna begin because I know we've not got too much time today. I mean, you've obviously directed Salome before on stage. At what point did the idea to kind of take those experiences and turn them into a movie, well, to make Seven Veils come together?
Really, with, with this latest remount, I found out that they were going to be remounting it a few years ago, actually, because that's the way opera works. And I just had issues around it because it's quite a provocative production, and it just felt bringing it into our society right now felt that there were things I wanted to shift or change, but I can't because we don't have the time when you do a remount. And so I started thinking about this character and how she could change things, but then why she would want to change things. And then it just evolved from there. And Jeanine, the character that Amanda's playing, just really took off and became kind of an avatar, but also something unto herself, right? She has her own history with this show. So it couldn't have happened if it weren't for the remount. Just technically, we needed to have that on stage, but I also had the time to really work on this script and developing her character.
Yeah. What do you think it is about this particular story that just keeps you coming
Oh,
back to it? I
well,
mean,
look, I mean, it's not just me. It really like it was introduced in the Bible. There's an account of it in the Bible, but then it really was picked up in the 19th century by a number of artists who were really obsessed with. She really is, in some ways, one of the first examples of a femme fatale, right? She really is this, and so she became this object of fascination, and certainly Oscar Wilde, wrote this extraordinary play, right? And which is really hard to imagine because it doesn't really exist on stage unless it's stylized because the language is so purple. But it makes a great libretto for Richard Strauss, and it's that someone could go that far in trying to secure the object of their desire. It's such a and also that for me, John the Baptist character could refuse someone's attention and like generate this feeling of madness, right? So it still continues to reveal itself to me. Like it's such a potent story, and what Wilde does with language, where he proposes that when you can't have something, then you have to describe it in such detail, as though, and so you own it through the language you use to describe it, which is what Salome does when she's talking about all the things she finds irresistible in John the Baptist. And then Richard Strauss writes this music which does the same thing. It describes everything in such detail. And then this production tries to visualize that, and then the film takes it to another level as well. So it's just I've been really interested in the past few years reading people like Natalie Haynes and Madeline Miller, and these kind of the way the Greek myths kind of like reverberate in our culture today, and how there are these almost archetypal figures, and Salome really is to be one of these female archetypes, and he is as well. John the Baptist, he's this weird transitional character, between the severity of the Old Testament and the sense of forgiveness and love that the New Testament sort of provides. He's sort of caught between the two. There's no way that anyway. I could go on forever. I'm not, we don't have time.
but I mean, I've read before that you've said that Salome has been kind of haunting you for the best part. I mean,
Yeah.
30 years. Do you feel even a slight element of closure now, having made this movie? Has this project scratched an itch at all?
Oh yeah, no, it really has. I think you could tell from. I mean, those images that are from earlier productions, which I shot myself. Like I knew at some point I needed to take it to this other place. I didn't know that it would be done in this particular way, but the fact that I was so there was something that we were creating on stage that was very moving for me, and I couldn't understand exactly what it was, and so I think I've really explored it with this film, and I certainly think that uh, Jeanine's character and her relationship to that narrative the fact that it was, part of her story that this director, absorbed and kind of appropriated, it was a great way to kind of channel all of those obsessions. But my hope is that if the Canadian Opera Company remounts it, they'll actually now pass it off to another director. Like, I think mounting a production 7 times is quite more than enough in over 30 years, right? I mean, that's very unusual in the opera world.
Yeah, the protagonist here, Jeanine, she can't help but not bring so much of herself into her direction, in her bringing her past into her present and into her craft and artistry. Is that true of yourself, and is it impossible not to do that as a filmmaker?
That's a great question. I think it's part of my job, right? I don't watch other directors at work, and so that's the strange thing. So I don't know how other people do it. But if you're not bringing something of yourself, if you're not trying to excite in your performers this sense of why it's emotionally so true, then it doesn't really work. The exchange isn't really there. And for me, the best way to do that is to talk about how it reverberates in my own life. So especially in the scripts that I've written, I mean, perhaps in the films that I've directed with other people's scripts, I'm a bit more surgical. But when it's my own material, like I'm really invested in it, and I do find that those are like they seem absurd and actually outlandish. But some of those moments where Amanda's really imploring and trying to communicate what it is that she wants from something, that's not so different from what I'm doing some of the time. I mean, sometimes actors get it immediately, and you're just in awe that it doesn't need that type of generation, the generation of an emotion. But I think I find it quite funny, that moment that she has with the page, where there's a specific thing she's trying to get, but you can't show it. You're not supposed to do that as a director. You're not supposed to actually tell an actor that this is what you want them to do. From my understanding, you're supposed to try and get them to find that solution through how to inspire them. So it is a kind of a crazy task, right? Especially when somebody doesn't, all you can do is explain what these lines mean to you, and then hope that the baton is passed on.
Mm-hmm. And is that style of directing, or just that direction at all? Is that different at all from directing for stage compared to screen for you? Do you find that it requires slightly different sensibilities for you, dependent on where you're directing for?
Well, because on film, like at a really practical level, on film, I can whisper those directions into an act. I can go up to an actor between takes, and I can be very private with them. But when you're working on stage, it's a much more public, and actually you don't do that. You actually everyone joins in, and it's a much more communal process. So I think what we're seeing, the exaggeration of it, but that's exactly what happens, is that the director's desk, once you're in the theater, is quite physically apart from the stage, and you are in an opera house, especially speaking into a microphone. So it feels like it's super public, right? That doesn't happen on a film set, obviously. So the film is it's much more intimate.
And I have been. Sorry. Yeah. No, I was just going to ask about. You mentioned about speaking about Amanda. I mean, you've worked with her before. It's such a wonderful performance here, because there's so much for her to get her teeth into and her head around. I mean, it's a really complex, nuanced character. You must have just been thrilled with her display. I mean, in terms of giving directions, there must have been not a huge amount to do in this instance.
Well, it just, to me, it's amazing when, like, to me, my favorite scene is something that happened to me the first time I directed an opera. No one had warned me that once the orchestra is there, you can't stop the action. Because it's so expensive. Every minute with the orchestra is like costing so much money. So the director can't say anything, and no one had told me that. And in the first rehearsal for this opera, actually, I did try and stop it, and I was hushed, by the conductor, much like she is. And but what she does with that moment is just like I was just in awe. Like, it was so moving, because that is something that I was transferring from my experience, and I had written those words, but she was just able to infuse them with so much feeling, and she could imagine what it meant to have the orchestra kind of confronting her with its machinery, as she's making herself so vulnerable. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to work with her, and we knew that after we made Chloe, we really wanted to do something else, but it's taken all this time really to find the right project, and it's been such a joy. And she's so game, she's so trusting, and she's just she feels to me like a very rare actor where she's so available, and yet there are so many things in this character's background. I think what's interesting about it and makes it a very unusual character is that she's aware of, it's not that any of these traumas are hidden to her, they're quite available to her. It's just that recreating this moment theatrically triggers a number of other things which she wasn't really aware of, in terms of what she would go through. So that makes it very unusual. It's not like we're, like she knows what her childhood is. I mean, we gather that through her conversations with her husband, and it's available to her. But this particular alchemy of what's happening and the humiliations of how the administration is trying to, keep a lid on her interpretation is kind of reawakening all sorts of other feelings.
Yeah. There's a scene, obviously, when the production's kind of being put on, and she's sort of filming it on her phone. She's filming the audience and the stage. She's kind of moving around the kind of theatre with her kind of phone. I just wondered about when you directed a production for stage or you have it off a screen and it's showing at TIFF, for example. What do you focus on in that room? Are you listening out for the audience? Are you watching audience members? Are you looking for tweaks, or are you watching the actors portray these characters? What's your kind of approach in those moments when something's finished?
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, like with theater, like it's never really finished because you can always tweak things, you can recalibrate things, you can take your feelings, like when you're doing a dress rehearsal and when you're doing a preview, and you take that back into the rehearsal room. But with a film, I mean, you have a cut, but you can't go back to the performers. At least not. I've never had that luxury of reshooting scenes. So it's in theater, it's a very important part of the process. Is you're trying to see how it plays with an audience. And this is rare because honestly, this will be the first audience. We didn't have test screenings, and so I'm very curious to see how it plays in a full house, because we didn't have the luxury of that. We had to, we were just finishing in time for TIFF, so we didn't, go through like with Chloe, we had test screenings and we were able to make adjustments, but we haven't done that here.
So it's my final question then. I mean, because you can see shades of your previous work. They could be sort of quite prevalent in some of the recurring kind of themes and stuff that we see in this movie. I was wondering if you consider there to be a kind of overarching identity to your body of work, something that kind of connects your projects together.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just fascinated in how we construct ourselves, that and how we use the medium, the technologies we have at our disposal to kind of help us construct who we are. And it's interesting that 40 years ago, it's funny, I was just showing my first feature to some students, and I've just always been really intrigued by that. And when I started making films, these technologies were not that available, and they were really quite rare, but now it's like we're overwhelmed with it. So that certainly how we present ourselves to each other and how we see ourselves has been mediated, and there are things about that have enhanced our experience, and other things which have trivialized and maybe even damaged our sense of identity and confused our sense of identity, certainly. But my films are all about emotional journeys. They're not academic, sort of like, they're not based on these ideas as they exist theoretically. I understand they could be interpreted that way, but I assure you that that's not how I'm thinking about it. It's always really about the emotional connection these people have with each other and with their own experience, and how the technologies, can be used to gain access to that, but also can be manipulated.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and best of luck with the premiere at TIFF. I hope it goes well.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey You Guys!
Hey, that's what they all say.
Hey You Guys!
Hey, you guys!